It is October 2020. All eyes are glued to our televisions. It's the night of the debate. Mr. Vice President, I am speaking. You could almost hear the collective gasp, the sigh, and then feel the wide smiles amongst women of color when then candidate Harris said, I'm speaking during the vice presidential debate. Many women of color I know rushed to social media, wondering if the world would listen, wondering if she would be heard, wondering how her words would land. It went viral. There were memes for weeks and months to come. I've spent the last few years meeting with women of color at all levels of their career, across many industries and sectors. The women I met are ambitious, smart, driven, but they're also isolated, frustrated, and often burnt out. There are patterns in what these women are experiencing. I heard and saw the weight of that challenge on their faces and in their energy. They were eager to share their stories, and at the end of our interviews, sometimes, oftentimes, in tears to finally know what they experienced within corporate structures was not unique to them. It was hard to hear their stories, but it also inspired me. Together, we can make change. After spending more than 20 years rising in corporate America, I left to start a movement to bring together professional women of color, to help them support each other, create a network effect, to help them rise, and to help them see they are not alone. I've spoken to more than 1,000 women of color, some in person, some over calls or Zoom. And one of the challenges I've heard over and over again is that women of color are struggling to be seen and heard in their companies and organizations. When Vice President Kamala Harris, then candidate Harris, said, I'm speaking, it spoke volumes to the women I met. For so long, there's been denial over the reality of what it means to be a woman of color in the workplace, especially corporate spaces. We've all been taught a false idea that capitalism is a meritocracy. Yes, most of us have been warned racism does exist, but not in company structures. No, that doesn't happen here. We've been taught we swipe our badges through our modern turnstiles and poof, companies and organizations act without bias. Most of us have been told hard work will end in high results, but women of color know that's not always true. The women I met experienced the challenges of I'm speaking on a daily basis. I'm speaking is code for many things. Yes, I'm speaking means we're tired of being talked over, but I'm speaking means our reality and our truth is different from our white colleagues. I'm speaking means our challenges and our narrative deserve room and space. I'm speaking means don't underestimate us or overlook us. I'm speaking means our path to get here was different than others who came before us. And there's value and history in that. The slogan I'm speaking represents the microaggressions women of color face, the gaslighting that occurs when they do speak up, and the ways in which the corporate system wasn't designed or made for us. The layers that come under words like I'm speaking are generational, buried, and complex. I'm speaking is about women of color reclaiming their power. And that's part of the challenge. When women of color do speak up and step outside what's expected of them, they quickly become labeled troublemakers and ungrateful. We've all heard the statements that companies want to end systemic racism, but the processes in place to report the problems and escalate issues of racism don't work and haven't been updated to hear women of color when they do speak up. I heard it over and over and over again. One Black lawyer, we'll call her Lisa, spent 8 years climbing the ranks of her firm. When Lisa found herself in an uncomfortable situation, having to file a complaint on a coworker for his inappropriate racist comments, she felt the firm turn on her in more overt ways. She was quickly labeled trouble. And looking back, Lisa said that the process, which took months, made her feel she had to prove the grievance and the impact the incident had on her versus her white colleague who was never asked to answer or explain his words in any way. The firm never even questioned him. In the end, some of Lisa's leaders had the audacity to ask her, how could she make such a big deal about such a small comment? Another Chinese woman, I'll call her Jackie, who worked in a large consumer products company, shared that a colleague delivered a racist joke in front of her. When she explained it was not appropriate and it was offensive, he just brushed her off. So she took it to her supervisor. Jackie was dissuaded from even going to HR. Her boss consulted HR and came back to her and said it was discussed, and everyone involved believed it will work out better for Jackie if she just didn't file an official complaint. It was best for Jackie's career if she just let it go, because these things have a way of bringing unwanted attention to the person filing. These unfortunately are not unique stories. Women of color, Investigators and legal experts I spoke with suggest the pattern is very common. It's called double victiming. The racist incident occurs, the person feels badly but reports it, and she's victimized in the escalation process that's only truly protecting the company or the firm. My company, nFormation, did research with Fairy Godboss earlier this year. We learned that 60% of more than 800 women of color surveyed felt their companies are not prepared to handle racist incidents in the workplace. Another senior biracial woman of color I met, Maya, was on the fast track in her global organization. One day, out of the blue, one of her white male colleagues said something racist. Perhaps it was ignorance rather than venom, but after thinking about it, it just felt wrong. Maya was so well regarded as a leader in her company, she decided going to HR was the right thing to do. To her surprise, her colleagues and mentors turned on her. Why can't you let it go? Why fight so hard? You're on the fast track and you're overreacting, they told her. Do you see a pattern here? These women were excelling in their careers. An incident happened. They felt confused, even unsure of what to do, but eventually reported the situation only to have their companies and teams turn on them. And the experts I met say it doesn't get better the higher up the career ladder you go. In fact, it may even get worse. Women of color are taken off their track, punished, sidelined, and muted for speaking their truth. In the end, most of these women lose their fight internally, and some hire lawyers to file for retaliation. Yes, some women like Maya may win some money, but money can't make up for what's happened. Most move on. Many women of color exit the corporate world and, shockingly, their entire field of practice when this happens. Leaders ask me all the time, why do women of color leave? This is one reason why. Women of color try to address race in the workplace, and the system turns on them. Even today, since the racial reckoning of 2020, the system still places blame and shame back on women of color when they report incidents of racism and sexism. You can't say you want to hear our voices and then turn around and penalize us when we speak. What is the solution? What can we do? What can you do? It's time for company cultures to evolve. It's time for a reporting process to support women of color in telling their truth. What would a world look like that didn't make women of color feel they're in the wrong for standing up to the system? Well, the solution is different group to group because the work we must each do is different. Let's start with our allies. Thankfully, we do have co-conspirators who help us make change within companies. But at the same time, there's also something that happens in corporate settings that's not unlike what happens in the real world, the bystander effect. Similar to a car accident where everyone believes someone else will help, but no one does. Typically in situations of racism at work, people believe someone else will step in or justice will be served in the end, so they don't intervene. Allies, you need to understand part of your work is fixing systems that were not created for or by people of color. If you see something or a colleague shares how a work situation is hostile, lean in, do something, say something. It's your problem too. And companies, executives, HR leaders, decision makers, this talk is about you too. Your focus can only be to protect the company. We need you to protect women of color too. If we're going to change unfair and racist cultures, companies really need to be willing to do the work. They need to be willing to look at their own processes and understand that it's improbable that any business is void of racism. Here is where we start. We need new processes to be created for reporting at work and listening to women of color. And we need you to inquire in new and different ways. If an issue is reported, look at the wider picture in the group or the department. If a woman of color is reporting an issue, it's most likely it's happened before or will happen again. Look at attrition data. Look at trends. Look at exit interviews. Look at what's happening to advancement rates of women of color around someone who reports an incident. We have more access to analytics than ever before. Use it to understand if there are departmental or team problems. And we need new ways to review these cases too. Bring in outside investigators to look into reports of racism. Having the same white HR leaders review reports of racism doesn't always work. Some don't understand racism, and the experts I spoke to suggest they don't know how to investigate them either. Number 2, if reporting is a confidential process, bosses and colleagues shouldn't know about it. Almost all the women I spoke with said their reported incidents were shared within their companies. There should be more discretion. There should be rewards for trying to improve racist cultures, not penalties. We need to stop retaliation. And finally, Most women of color who do report an incident exit their organizations with non-disclosures in place. Similar to the discussion about capitalism being a meritocracy, we need to realize that most reporting processes are set up to protect the company from litigation and not get at the root of the issue. Money and bearing issues seem to be the answer to many indiscretions in the corporate world. Something happens, we will pay you, and you will not speak about it. That isn't helping women of color, and it isn't helping evolve our business cultures away from inequities. Whether it's sexual harassment, forms of discrimination, or racism. The larger shift that needs to happen in corporate America is the move from payouts to protection. Protection for all employees. Women of color, I'm speaking to you right now. I know it's hard to speak truth to the system. Not every environment allows for it, and you have to guard your well-being against all else. Women of color at work are sick from navigating the challenges of patriarchy and racism. Realize that when incidents of racism happen, women are usually taken aback. We feel discombobulated. Most I met go through a process of shame, grief, and disbelief. As bias, microaggressions, and racist incidents accumulate, our working environment begins to feel toxic and stresses multiply. We are on guard. It affects our body chemistry, in some cases for years to come. You need to find ways to armor up if you're going to stand up to toxic work environments. You need to make sure the process to report the crime doesn't take more from you than the actual infraction itself. And that's not easy. Sit down and really think about what you need as you speak up. Find support and people you trust as you go through this. Is there a way to stand up to the system that allows you to preserve your energy, your power, your mental health? Listen to your body and listen to yourself. Only you will know. Do not lose your power as you navigate through their power. We are speaking, and what we are saying can help make work better for all of us. Too many women of color leave the workforce every year. We need systems to adapt and adjust because if they don't, women of color won't stay, and the cost of that is too great for everyone. We are speaking. Are you ready to listen?